Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 75. And this episode, we wanted to talk about non-violent video games. As most of the time, I guess, the surface read of video games for the last 40 years has been, it's just a whole bunch of violence, murder simulators, all you do is kill things, and we know better than that. And there are so many ways that you can have a lot of fun or reach a goal or tick things off a quest list without having to end the lives of any zeros and ones or people on the other end of the internet connection.
Yeah, this comes on the heels of the very recent, as of when we're recording, release of Animal Crossing New Horizons, which is Nintendo's series of life simulators, not dissimilar to The Sims, but less on the realism and more on the kind of fantastical realism. You know, you can still build stuff and grow stuff and harvest stuff, but it's less rooted in like needing to go to work and having a job and being human. Although one could argue that the villagers are human in nature compared to the rest of the animals in Animal Crossing, at least. But it is a game where you live life. You get an incredible amount of debt that's crushing and horrifying, and then you try and pay it off slowly while building a life for yourself. You know, reality.
Life stuff. Well, as someone who has never played an Animal Crossing game, my outside observation of it is sort of like Nintendo's interpretation of The Sims playing Harvest Moon.
Yes, I mean you're not incorrect. The idea behind it is at least, well, let's go with the newest game, right? Because that's the most recent release. In the new game, when you turn it on, you are greeted by Timmy and Tommy Nook, and they're preparing you for your desert island getaway, which you then will go to this desert island with Nook Industries. You will settle on it. You will continue. You will begin to grow a community on this deserted island that will eventually not be so deserted, and you can, get items for your tent. You can craft things like tools to collect fruit and catch bugs and go fishing, and you can help a museum curator create a museum where you can go see all of these specimens that you've caught. It's essentially building a life in a new place, and previous games have always been some version of that. The old Animal Crossing commercial for the GameCube version was like a spoof on Real World, except with people in these giant Animal Crossing villager costumes, talking about the animal villagers. And it's really charming and it's really sweet. But yeah, it's essentially a life simulator, but the music is really chill and low key. It's got a real-time internal clock, so if it's nighttime where you are, it's nighttime in the game. You can pick the hemisphere you're in as well, so it helps track the time. And I think also the crops you get and the fish you get, depending on the time of year, are different because it follows the actual seasons. Although what I'm curious about is New York is barely following the actual seasons as our temperature fluctuates constantly. So I'm curious to see how that will actually work in game, because it could be like snowing here, but not in the game, depending on the literal date. But that's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole example of reality is unrealistic.
It's essentially a life simulator. There's no violence. Like even the fish you catch or the bugs you catch, you either sell them or donate them. And when you sell them, you hand them off in a bag or a box, so they are kept alive. They're not killed for food. I've not gotten to a point yet where you can cook, though you can eat fruit that you find on the island. And every island in the new game, you have your own unique fruit to your island. And I think there are 6 fruit in total. And you can go to friends' islands to get their fruit and then plant it on your island, so you have a bigger variety.
Oh, that's cool.
It's at the end of the day a very chill kind of hang out and do some tasks kind of podcast. Or not podcast, game. But I have podcast on the brain because what I've been doing is playing it on my computer using my streaming tool, so the sound is coming through my PC, and listening to podcasts while I play, which it's kind of the perfect game for that because the characters don't speak English. They speak gibberish like The Sims. So you're not really missing out on voice acting or storyline just by not 100% engaging, because the chill music in the background also blends really well to listening to other people talk on it, like kind of in an NPR way a little bit.
You can kind of imagine you're walking around with your like AM FM radio on the island and it's playing, NPR or podcasts.
Exactly. In fact,
it's further immersion.
Yes, and I wouldn't doubt if later on you could buy some kind of MP3, nondescript MP3 player. I mean, every new island that creates a new island, you get in the mail a Nintendo Switch from Nintendo that you can display in your home. So
neat.
It's not beyond them to be that meta.
Well, I mean, from what I know of Animal Crossing, they've been that meta since the original GameCube release, where you could unlock full ROMs of old NES titles.
Correct.
And I think you could play like 24 NES games on there. And this is a Switch title. The last few Animal Crossings have been handheld, or rather the last 2, counting this one.
Yep.
Or that have been portable. So I think you're right. I think if they don't start putting like Nintendo Tunes or some sort of MP3 option in there, that's money on the table, man.
Yeah, and I'm sure that hidden stuff will be there somewhere. I mean, it usually because it's based on a real-time clock, certain things you can do endlessly, and other things, like if a new house has to be built or a new villager is coming, that usually takes overnight till the next morning. And so you're locked out of that, which is kind of nice, because you can do whatever you want as far as making money or smaller tasks, but the larger tasks are locked into taking your time, which reinforces that kind of chill, low-key kind of stuff, which typically wouldn't be my jam, but I've just been so overstressed and overstimulated lately that it's kind of come out at a perfect time. Nintendo didn't plan to release this game in a quarantine, but it definitely will work out for them that they did, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's kind of nice that, Animal Crossing is definitely the latest in a long series of games where the goal is, not conquering your foes. And there's all kinds of like weird arguments to be made, like, nonviolent video games are stupid, or, what's the point? Or it's just, you're just doing a bunch of tasks on a list, as if kill 20 orcs isn't a task on a list. But it's a different way of interacting with the digital environment. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with it. Scratches a different itch, because you're playing Animal Crossing. It's challenging, and it's a little bit of like management and figuring it out, but it's also nice and relaxing. And I can think of, when we were getting ready for this episode, I was thinking about some of my favorite nonviolent games, and there are a few that are almost weird art pieces. Like Journey.
Sure.
Have you played through Journey, Matt?
I haven't. I have it. I got it free on PS Plus, and I've had it for a while, and I haven't played it yet, but it is on my short list of games to play. But it's definitely on all of the lists of nonviolent games. It's near the top.
It's one that it's not a very long game. You can beat it in an afternoon. Mm-hmm. But it is one that you are a character that doesn't speak. You can interact with the occasional other player that's online even, but they also don't speak either. There is no chat at all, so we're kind of back to that model. But you are also in a huge landscape. You are trying to go from one place to another. I don't want to spoil too much of the experience if you haven't played it, but it's one where you're not even certain of your goal. You just sort of are heading towards something because you're playing a video game and you know you need to be heading towards something. You're not just running around, and the game is called Journey.
Right.
So with that in mind, you set forth and you find new things. You find new places. Occasionally, you may go off the beaten path and try to explore them. But for the most part, it's sort of what you unfold on the way. There's no text boxes to sort of be like, this was this, or you are that, or you feel this way. It's just going forth and discovering. And what's funny is, I think there are a lot of people that feel the way I do, in that it's very moving, but also very calming. There's just this, there's no timer going. There's no large pounding soundtrack, which can be a wonderful thing. But for this game, it is simply just go, just be, just find. This is okay. But on the flip side, my wife, Sarah, gets so anxious, not even playing this game, when I am playing this game. While I was playing through it, she would like go look at the TV and go, "Oh God, you're playing that game," and walk off. I think because it was originally a PS3 game, and because of that, it has that wonder of, well, we're not rendering a bunch of stuff. Here is this vast open land, like really taking the open world aspect of a game to its logical conclusion, I suppose, or its then boundaries. So there is a definite, if you're looking at it, if you have any sort of digital agoraphobia, oh my God, it is a huge open space.
Yeah.
But that company has also made several other games. I can't speak to them as well because I haven't played them, but I mean, that's an example that I can think of, a different way that you can interact and find. I mean, I suppose that also is a extreme version of what many would call a walking simulator.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so there are tons of kinds of games that don't have violence in them, right? Like every rhythm game that's ever come out, for the most part, Rock Band, Guitar Hero, the like, don't really have violence in them as well.
I mean, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters being an exception, but that's a Japan-only PS1 title, so, everyone knows about it.
Right, of course. But, I mean, there are other games that you could be an aggressive character and there could still be no violence. I mean, think about a game that I've talked about at length over the last year, which is Goose Game, Untitled Goose Game to be specific. It still has no title, unfortunately. We're trying, but still no title for that game. There
was a title. The Goose took it.
The Goose did definitely take it. But that's a non-violent game. Like you're aggressive for sure, but the goose doesn't even attack anybody. Like you'll tug a war with people, you'll flap your wings to intimidate, but there's no combat in that game. There's no violence. It's mostly...
You can deal no damage and take no damage.
Correct. You just irritate everyone around you. So emotional pain is a different story, but there is no physical violence in that game other than, actually, I guess we can't say it's completely nonviolent. In the first area, you do make the gardener smash his thumb with a hammer and fall over.
That's true.
Technically, that's violence.
Yeah.
But, I think it's to degrees, right? Like Animal Crossing is a completely non-violent game. There's not a lick of violence in it whatsoever, unless you consider fishing violence, but then we're getting into PETA territory, and I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Me neither.
But, then there are other games that are chill that do have some violence in them, like Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley, while you're mostly farming, you are going into the mine and fighting monsters to get ore and stuff, and so there is combat. But the majority of the game is just farming and relaxing, and then the extreme of that, of course, we mentioned briefly before, is Harvest Moon, which is all about farming and creating this farm. I'll be honest, I've only barely played, I think, the Super Nintendo Harvest Moon, which was fine. It was fine enough. I wasn't as into chiller games back then, but it's essentially the progenitor to Farmville and Stardew Valley and everything else that came after it is Harvest Moon. And I have friends who loved that game series, and that's one where the goal is to raise crops and raise animals and, create this chill life on a farm and build your community and meet people and develop relationships and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Harvest Moon's another series that my friend Mike loves the Harvest Moon series, since we were little kids, and I've always felt vaguely guilty that I never got into it. As an adult, I should give it another try, but it's funny. Certain genres definitely lend themselves towards being non-violent, and even having violence or even aggression is something of an outlier when it happens. I mean, simulation games in the management sense, certainly. And I'll get to that in a second, but while you were describing Harvest Moon, it kind of occurred to me, when you said it was the progenitor to Farmville and those sorts of games, I remember a very distinct point when Farmville, was that a Facebook game or was it its own browser?
I think it was a Facebook game, but you could play it in its own browser as well.
Okay, then that's how I'm remembering it. When it was the biggest thing I could see around me.
Yep.
When everybody was playing it. And I asked somebody, what you do in it, and getting the description of it all. And it was this thing of, okay, so you plant the crops, yeah, huh? When can you harvest them? After a certain amount of time. Do you have to do anything to them? No, just plant them and they come back. Okay. Then what do? I sell them to get more stuff. And then you can grow better crops. Are there any other mechanics? Is there anything else? No, just that. So there's only like one ideal to be pushing towards. Yeah. And you just click on this stuff. Yeah. This doesn't sound fun at all. And this led to a later argument with that person. And thinking about it, it's both similar and yet not quite the same as level grinding in an RPG.
Right.
And I don't know how much of me saying it's not exactly the same thing is my pride talking, but I think a certain amount of changing the loadouts of there's at their core, you strip away the dressing. It is essentially the same thing, but there's more fiddly bits and choices and random elements to be had and made in most RPGs or most games where you can grind for levels or experience or faction or whatever. But it is still mindless satisfaction.
Sure.
And I suppose in something like a Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing, there's probably random elements or things you have to like work against or deal with or also handle while also managing that time. All of the social aspects of being on your island, your farm, your village are another piece of it. And so when you have multiple wheels turning, it becomes, it's not just spinning a top. It's now a clock of multiple cogs in a machine. So I guess that's the difference.
For sure. And also
Farmville was too simple.
Too simple. I mean, that's fine. I know tons of people enjoyed it. There was a time when we thought Facebook gaming was the future of video games, which, I mean, it seemed like for a little while.
It did.
But that said,
2009 was a weird time.
It was. But, farming games aren't the only nonviolent games. I mean, there are tons of exclusive puzzle games that also relish in nonviolence. I mean, with the exception of
most puzzles.
Yeah, I would say with the exception of the final battle, Portal is completely nonviolent. I mean, GLaDOS wants to kill you, but you're not committing violence until the end when you blow up GLaDOS, which, spoiler, I guess, for a game that's been out for a while that just about anybody can play because it was free for a long time on Steam. But that said, like, it's still considered a non-violent game because it's all puzzle solving. And even the final battle is puzzle solving. You're just launching missiles at a robot. And you're not actually firing the missiles technically, so technically it's still non-violent. It's a thin line.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is also, one, you are not fighting another living being, you are fighting an AI, a robot. And we can get into the arguments and semantics of that and life till we're blue in the face. And to my understanding, you're mostly just burning up core pieces and like incinerating parts of GLaDOS.
Correct. Yeah. The rockets are knocking loose pieces of GLaDOS.
Right. And then you incinerate them, which again is most of the action you're taking. And you already did that to the companion cube earlier on. It's a technically non-violent game that threatens violence at every turn.
Yeah, that's true.
Between the escapes that you have to make, the aggressive language and actions that go on, it's just sort of like, it is very technically a non-violent game. I'm not sure if the original Oddworld games, I don't think those are considered non-violent because, my goodness, there's a lot of violence in that game. But it's one where, for the most part, your character, the one you're playing, is not able to enact any violence harsher than slapping some sense into one of your allies.
Right.
Like if they've got laughing gas or different things like that, like it's part of most of your interactions with the world are talking. But there is the ability to possess enemy units, enemy creatures, which, well, I'm not shooting them or hitting them, but I am overriding their consciousness. So it's non-violent.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
I bring this up just as a thought.
Well, yeah, I think we can call a game like that a pacifist game more than a non-violent game because there's still violence in it.
Yeah.
But you're not committing the violence, which is a level of this, right? Like, the classic example, which also came out recently, Doom Eternal and the Doom series, like that's all about this invincible Marine who just kills waves and waves and waves of demons, and it's gory and it's visceral, and like that's the goal of that game. That's the purpose. And we're talking.
It's an ultra-violent video game.
Correct, and which has its place too. And I played Doom 2016 this year, and I'm looking forward to Eternal when I'm done with Animal Crossing, which could be forever.
Yeah.
But I think the goal here is to just talk about games that not necessarily just don't have violence in them, but also where you're not expected to commit violence. And I brought up puzzle games because I think that, with Portal as a minor exception, a lot of puzzle games require no violence. Geoff is the Picross master, and most of those are just creating art or revealing pictures.
Yep.
And even our recent guest, James, we're talking about Pixel Puzzle Makeout League. I was getting there. There might be it's a league of superheroes, so there could be moments of violence hinted upon, but I think for the most part that's also going to focus on romance because it's a dating sim. And also that leads to a lot of narrative visual novels, especially dating sims. For the most part, those games don't have violence either, other than Doki Doki Literature Club. But we're not going to get into that.
Well, and some of the more obscure ones that kind of cross into dungeon crawler. But you're right. Visual novels, by their very mechanics, are non-violent. I mean, there are emotional moments where you're causing emotional damage, but I think that's splitting hairs.
For sure. And I think, in our time now, I mean, when we were growing up, there were always games without violence in them. There were puzzle games and all sorts of other things. But I think
if you're really upset about the blocks in Arkanoid, I can do nothing for you.
Right. But I feel like now more than ever, especially with the rise of the indie game, we have such a larger grouping of games and a plethora of titles that don't require violence. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by violence out in the world, or you just you want to avoid that kind of aggression, there are a ton of different games you can play. And I think it's really important because we can customize gaming experiences based on what the player wants to the nth degree. I think a game like Journey couldn't have existed 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago because it needed the art style to convey this wonder without combat.
That's true. Though there is a game that is, I'm looking it up so I can get some of the details right. That's kind of a funny, I guess, crossroads of that. And it's a game called Proteus that came out in 2013. It is a sort of exploration walking simulator game. It is a game that has procedurally generated environments and no prescribed goals. And the art style of it is it's cutting edge graphics only if you're comparing it to Katamari Damacy. Or it's very stylized. It's 3D environments, but not in the same way as something like Journey or most modern 3D environments are. It's there is no shading on anything. The graphics and everything that they use are very basic so that they can create larger landscapes. And I agree that we couldn't make Journey 20 years ago.
Right.
But it's interesting to see, and especially with the rise of indie developers and the fact that you can have small teams exploring interesting ideas and strange swerves and strange veerings from conventional goals, that you can create a game like Journey, like Proteus, I'm sure there's a number of exploration games that I am blanking on right now that allow you're still interacting with the world. And this is still different than, I could just put on a YouTube video of, sounds of waves or something. No, you are interacting with the world. You are getting a chance to wander where you want to, discover and find whatever it is that you can. It does kind of have a little bit in line with a puzzle game in its way. It's just one with no defined goals. The puzzle is, what are your goals?
For sure.
Yeah, because a lot of puzzle games are great to relax with, great to play, and are generally non-violent. I mean, from the days of Tetris, you've got Luminous, you've got Strata, you've got Mini Metro, you've got, there's Picross games and crossword games and Sudoku games, but I'm trying to think of other, like, puzzle games that are, like, unto themselves. But most of them, yeah, it's more putting things in place, lining things up, creating a picture, and that is its own form of satisfaction more than, you've gained experience, level up. You have destroyed 100% of enemies in this area. You have saved all 34 hostages, which are also forms of goal achievement and, seeing the full percentage on whatever level, whatever world, whatever quest. That same satisfaction comes from, when you knock out 4 lines at once in Tetris.
Well, sure. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. Like, it's funny you mentioned Katamari before. And, like, inherently that game is goofy and silly and non-violent. Like, you can roll people up in your giant ball, but they just kind of wiggle, And so I would even consider that a non-violent game in the same way we consider Goose Game a non-violent game, right? Like, there's some humor and some ridiculousness, but you're not killing anybody. Nobody's dying.
Right. And the fact that, you can argue about it, but the fact that you can redo the levels again and again sort of suggests that they're okay, or that we're not concerning ourselves with that. There are some very dark fics about it, though.
I'm sure. I don't doubt it.
I haven't read through most of them, but I am aware they exist. But that's just human nature. You give people violent games and they'll find ways to, someone will find a way to reach max level in World of Warcraft without killing anything. And people have done that.
Yep.
And by the same token, you go into a non-violent game and somebody is going to find a way to make it as destructive, as sociopathic as they possibly can. But that's not the fault of the game, really.
Yeah. It's breaking the limits, which we as gamers are designed to do a little bit. See if we can work outside the boundaries of what a game contains.
And we as a larger community are able to share that with each other, so larger leaps are often made, or at least we see ones we wouldn't normally within our small friend groups just growing up.
Yeah. And I think when we're talking about nonviolent games too, we're talking about all kinds of violence, right? Like, someone might not consider Sonic or Mario a violent game, and while it's not gory or graphic in any way, you are still killing creatures to get coins, to move on to the next level, and often those games bosses like blow up but don't die, like they escape, but there's still violent acts being committed. Dorkley
it's as violent as any Saturday morning cartoon of the early 90s.
Well, sure, and Dorkley has done skits on YouTube about that, like Mario jumping on a turtle and killing it and knocking its head off, and that Koopa Troopas see him as a violent murderer. Like, there are gags with that, but I think at the end of the day, what I consider nonviolent is, again, games where you can't actually kill other people or harm them physically. And I think also probably why Portal ends up getting lumped in with nonviolent games is because technically you're blowing up a robot that's trying to kill you. Technically, it's not violent because it's not alive. It's like that whole argument, which I'm not saying is correct or not, but I think why it tends to get lumped in with other things, even if you are taking aggressive acts. But I think for me, those kinds of games are more important now as an adult, is because violence of any kind can be stressful. To the same degree, if you're on board for it, it might not be, right? Like when I was playing Doom 2016 a few months back, I knew what I was getting into. I knew what I wanted to play, and I had a blast. I had such a good time, because I'm not saying, this is not us saying you can't play violent games or that violent games are bad. It's just discussing that there are things off the beaten path, because there are definitely more violent games than non-violent games, numbers-wise, or at least popularity-wise.
Certainly an ease of developing a goal, or like orienting a goal in your game.
Correct.
That's, a violent one is an easy one to do. And that's not to say that it's bad design. It's just we've got decades of experience and backlog on that.
Right. I think it's why Goose Game was as big as it was, is because it was so outside what was considered the norm for creating a video game, a gaming loop, that it charmed a lot of people. And like I said, that said, I'm not against violent video games. I love Doom 2016, but the reason I chose Animal Crossing over Doom Eternal, and I will eventually get Doom Eternal because I do want to play it, is because at this time, right now, in the middle of a pandemic, which we are currently living through, I needed something that will help me relax. I have tons of games that I can play that have combat and violence in them already that I haven't finished. I wanted to start playing Titanfall 2 because I have it on PS4. I've been playing through the Mega Man Zero and ZX series. Like, there are other games that can scratch that itch already, but I don't have anything besides Stardew Valley to scratch the non-violent kind of chill out vibe that I want. And Animal Crossing coming out fits the bill perfectly and allows me to relax in a way that other games just don't. And it's not to the fault of those games. I think it's more just what I need right now living in the world we're living in, which isn't, again, to the fault of the developers or those violent games. It's just me realizing my needs as an adult in this time we're living in.
Yeah, and for some people, they're engaging in that is playing Doom Eternal.
Right.
And you're right. It is fulfilling different needs, and it's great that we are living in an era where we can kind of choose how we interact with that media and with those things. Because one of the other reasons I feel I should further develop my thought on it's an easier choice to choose a violent objective is, I mean, when you only had a few pixels to showcase everything on screen, not everything, but to showcase this character versus this one, when you only have so much going on, you need ways to interact with that. And collision damage is always one of those concepts that just feels absolutely ridiculous. You bumped into me. Why did I lose my power up? Why am I taking so much damage? There's nothing even dangerous on that person. But in a sense of this sprite crossed over with this sprite, well, we have to have something happen. Do they conduct trade? Do they shake hands? Do they hug? Well, that's too complicated. We actually can't program that. Okay, damage. Cool. And it's just sort of that sense of a goal. I mean, that same way that people can argue about like whatever's violent or not. You're eliminating the lines in Tetris. It is a violent act, and the choice of that's getting into theater degree stuff. Sorry, but well, it is. There's this whole concept of every choice you make is a violent act because you are destroying all other possibilities that you have chosen not to do, and that's my esoteric philosophy for the day. But now that we are in a place where we can more acutely, finitely, we can have finer control over how we interact with an environment. Because older games, this is either violent or text-based or like conversation-based adventure game. And even adventure games had fighting sequences sometimes. But we now have the ability to explore a story, a world in different ways. And whether that is, just knocking out cubes or blocks or going back to your old hometown in a game and, talking with your friends and seeing where everybody's going with their lives and pondering that, or, trying to get senpai to notice you, or whatever it may be. We can... There's a lot of different ways to interact with the real world through video games and just video games in general now, and it's really great.
Well, yeah, and I think we've even left out tons of stuff that I think are obviously nonviolent, right, to a degree, like sports games, with the exception of football, which some people would argue is very violent because it's bodies colliding.
Right.
Ultimately, most sports games are nonviolent, especially like, you are discouraged in basketball and baseball games to sock the other players or tackle them to the ground. I'll never forget, I played NFL Blitz. I had not watched a lot of football when I was younger. I watched a little bit, but I played NFL Blitz with a good friend of mine, Matt, and like in that game you're encouraged after the play is over to like go tackle them or power bomb them, or it was an arcadey game. And then I played Madden for the first time after that, and I tried to do that, and I got penalized for it. And I was like, what the hell, isn't that the point of football, is to like destroy people? Oh, I've made a mistake, I understand now.
Well, that's just us as nerds not understanding football.
Exactly. But like in all seriousness, a lot of those sports games, a lot of sports fans play those kinds of games for the same reason I might play Animal Crossing. I mean, there's on Steam football, not American football, but like football everywhere else in the world. There's a football manager game that has had yearly releases that a friend of mine named Chris, who plays all the time, he plays it on Steam, and you're essentially managing a football club. Picking players, designing the season, setting practices, like all of the stuff that doesn't have to do with you actually playing the sport, just managing the team playing the sport, which is so far from the other side of violence. To the same degree, we talked about walking sims, and I don't want this episode to end without mentioning What Remains of Edith Finch, which I've now played twice, but I've never played myself yet, and I really need to. The first time is I watched my spouse Sarah play through it, and she loved it. And then I watched my friend Derek, shout out to Derek of SDGC, watched his spouse play it on his live stream, I think 2 weeks ago. I think it was before the quarantine, so at least 2 weeks ago.
All right.
And it's such a brilliant game about this young girl returning to her family home and discovering what happened to all of these family members who had died in some way or another. And while there's violence in the game, it is a non-violent game. You are not committing violence. You don't even see the violence for the most part. I think it always cuts away before something happens. But it discusses the death of these family members, which I think to say isn't spoiling it. I think it's worth playing no matter what. It's just a really interesting deep dive into the lives of this family that had a dark and complicated past.
Yeah.
And you kind of step in, you read these letters that let you step into the bodies of these people and live those brief moments in their lives. It's really fascinating. And it's games like that are told through narrative that require no action per se or combat, I think are just as interesting because it's teaching you to tell stories in a very different way, which isn't better or worse. It's just different. And I'm always fascinated by things we can do that are different.
It opens those doors so we can develop on it, of course. Also thinking about this, I realized some of the most popular games of all time and I'm not going by numbers or metrics, or I'm not looking at a list. Don't at me on that. I'm just thinking on some of the most popular games of public consciousness, whether that endured or not, were A, tie-in games, but a lot of those were nonviolent, and B, games that sort of were pushing a medium in some way. There's 4 I can think of right now. There is Tetris, which was packaged with Game Boys. It helped sell the Game Boy. It's a game that even the designer and when he showed it to people would lose time just playing it because it's addictive.
Right.
And it's one where you don't need to tell people how to switch weapons. You don't need to teach people how to jump and run. It's just things are falling. You can rotate them, and you almost naturally want to match them up. It just satisfies you. So there you go. And millions and millions and millions sold. And we are still remaking it and still finding it in new things. It's timeless. A little less timeless, but still very relevant, Myst.
Yes.
The first CD-ROM game.
Yes.
So it showcased that sense of what a world to explore. There is absolutely no violence in Myst.
Yep.
Per se. There is implied stuff. There has been war. There has been family rivalry. There has been all sorts of horrible things. But you are going around exploring, interpreting, and completing puzzles, finding pages, and trying to free a friend. And it's one that people go back to. There was a recent... It's one that has been remade. The original version it was just all pre-rendered pictures that when you moved, you would just click in the direction you're going, and there'd be just sort of an After Effects transition, your first time with PowerPoint transition to the next pre-rendered picture. You turn to the left, same foggy, transition to looking to the left with grainy FMVs of interacting with people, often in books. But it was still one that, there's been Real Myst. Well, that is a full 3D rendition of that game.
Yep.
People are still going back to it. Some of it's nostalgia, and some of it is, just that tapped into something for people, this discovery of a story. And one where you had a little bit of an introduction if you had the full thing, but it was very much solving a mystery and trying to determine so much. Another one on the more Tetris-y side was one we talked about last episode, Wii Sports.
Yes.
That it's very straightforward because, like I said, Tetris, move pieces, rotate pieces. Great. Nothing else. Further iterations have complicated it, but I'm just talking about the Game Boy version. Myst. Click on things. Cool. Click on things. That's how you move. That's how you interact. Click. Wii Sports. Here is this Wiimote. Wiggle it around. Look at your guy wiggling stuff around. Here are a bunch of sports games that you don't even have to know all the rules of, but you can infer, even if you've never seen them before, how to bowl, how to swing a baseball bat, how to shoot baskets. You can, it's all there, very straightforward, and one that you can show to everybody, and it comes packaged with the game, so you know about motion control and socialize. And then on the not packed into things, and then this is kind of leads into a whole nother aspect of stuff that we've only talked about a little bit, Minecraft.
Yep.
Minecraft is one of those games that if you want to, you can be kind of a dick in it. You can do some violent stuff, and there's definite violence to it. There can be, but it's one that I would argue the vast majority of what it is creation and exploring, gathering resources, and building, and the sheer amount of variety of what people have been able to create and share in that game speaks very well to video games, to community, to people. People have built entire computers and emulators with just Minecraft, or people have made libraries that they could share works worldwide without borders or political boundaries. And also people have just, built weird cow catapults.
Yeah, Minecraft is one of those games that I was hesitant to bring up only because, there is clear combat in it, right? You get armor, you get weapons, you can fight zombies and skeletons and spiders. But I would agree that
there is also a mode.
You're right. Well, there's also the free roam mode where you can just create on your server and build things without the mechanics of the game and just create. And you can also create within the game without having to fight things for the most part, or can avoid fighting things.
Right. And I think if the game was only you are in the middle of nowhere and there's creepers coming for you and you have to defend yourself, it would still have been a popular game. But I think the free roam mode is kind of what makes Minecraft an institution, a piece of culture.
For sure.
It's what's given it its enduring power.
Well, yeah, because in the free roam mode, it's essentially a puzzle game, right? You're putting puzzle pieces together to create something, whatever it is, using the natural resources within the game.
And we've had games like that before, Widget Workshop, Incredible Machine, but
this is a different level, I think. And also, what's really interesting and fascinating about Minecraft is I feel like Minecraft is one of those games that's kind of had something for everybody, but it was definitely not made for our generation of gamer. Our generation of gamer like it and play it. I know I play it. I know you've played it. But it's really for our nephews and nieces, our sons and daughters of people our age. That's when this game really took off because it was so accessible to that generation. It was on every platform, from iPads to phones to video game consoles to PC. I think that's when it really took off. I think the YouTubers who mostly make videos about Minecraft were closer to our age, but it's definitely the younger generation, I feel like, that made that game blow up the way it did, because it was just, I can tap the screen and do anything? Okay, let's do anything, And a lot of the free roam mode is just literally plucking pieces and putting them together to make a larger picture, which is more artistic than the base game of mining and crafting. See what I did there?
I do see what you did there.
I think it's thinking outside the box that has made Minecraft the institution that it is. Like you mentioned before, creating emulators within it. Somebody created Pokemon Red or Blue, I think it was Blue, in the game.
It's just a giant Game Boy that you can interact with to play Pokemon Blue.
And it's the whole game. It's not like a display to look cool. He created the game within Minecraft, which is just insane because it requires a level of development knowledge, and design knowledge that's beyond the average video game player, I would assume, at least speaking for myself. And so that's what's really fascinating. And, even though the creator that shall not be named because he's an asshole didn't intend for that, the fact that he created something that could do that is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing, and probably why it's always going to be at the top of most people's nonviolent game list is because of that freedom that's beyond any of those other games that we mentioned earlier. And that doesn't mean it's better than them. It's just I think it's jumped to the forefront because of that and continues to be the most streamed game, the most YouTubed game. Like it will, I think, stay for a long time one of the most popular games because it's just so limitless when compared to other games of its ilk.
Its possibilities are absolutely incredible. There's a lot to be said for The Sims or the games that it sprung from: Sim City, Sim Tower, Sim Farm, Sim Copter, Sim, any of those. But yeah, the sheer width and breadth and depth of possibility within Minecraft is absolutely incredible. There are sub-communities and niches within that of what people are trying to build and achieve and do together. And it wouldn't be the same if you could just run around and start wrecking things.
No, for sure not. And I think it's funny, we also haven't mentioned a ton of games that I think often became popular because they diverged from the main titles that were more violent oriented. But like spin-off games of any major franchise tend to go in a non-violent direction, right? Like Mario Party, Kirby's Canvas Curse, Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, which was already non-violent and everyone hates that game. But like these board game or other game style stuff like Pokemon Pinball or
any pinball game, really, yeah,
right, like
except Sonic, because you were explicitly hitting things, but
that's true.
But yeah, you're right.
Like those spin-offs also relish in nonviolence. I mean, I think the reason Mario Party was as popular as it was, the earlier ones especially, is because it was a board game where you were engaging in almost the opposite of what Mario did normally. There were relationships that were still similar, like to Bowser and other things, but and there was mini games that could be construed as violent, I guess. But for the most part, games like that were considered nonviolent, and why they became so successful.
Yeah, they only incited violence outside of the game.
Well, right, when you wanted to throw your controller at your friend because he cheated in a mini game by taking your controller away. Not that I'm bitter.
Yeah, or you finally get a star and they took it from you, and they won't let you forget it. I'm not bitter.
No.
I'm not bitter.
Not at all. These games don't make enemies.
Absolutely. Well, so with all this being said, Matt, what is your favorite or one of your favorite non-violent games?
It's such a good question that I don't have a ready answer. I mean, I'll admit I've only had about 2 days with it as of when we're recording. And so I really love Animal Crossing New Horizons, but I've only had a few days with it, so I don't know that I can say it's my favorite.
Right.
I don't know. It's tough. Like, there are stipulations to a lot of my favorite nonviolent games. Like Stardew Valley and Minecraft, I love a lot, but only when I'm playing with other people. I try playing those games by myself, and I just feel overwhelmed and lost. But when I'm playing with friends, usually they'll have some kind of game plan on how to build out their farm or their house, and I can contribute, and it feels easier for me.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, Mario Party 2 is up there now that we talk about it, because Mario Party 2 is the best Mario Party ever made. I don't care. Don't at me. Mm-hmm. So that's up there. But I don't know. I guess if we're counting Portal as a nonviolent game, I would say Portal. Portal is one of those games that I played much after it had come out and had already known the gist, and still every beat, every moment, every puzzle was satisfying and fun. And even though I struggled with some of those puzzles, I never felt like I couldn't do it. Like we talked about not long ago, difficulty in games and how, sometimes that can be a barrier for me. I like games that challenge you without making the challenge impossible. I get folks who like the Dark Souls games. That's great. Not for me. I need something that's an achievable challenge. And I think Portal is probably one of my favorite non-violent games, if we put it in quotes, because, again, there is some semblance of violence in it. The focus is not the violence. The focus is the character being a pacifist trying to solve puzzles with this one gun that they have. I think would be up there because it's just a brilliant amount of storytelling and puzzles. So I think that would probably be at the top of my list. I would put Pokemon Pinball up there too, especially what was the second? There was the second generation based one, right? I forget.
Ruby and Sapphire. Well, there was the original one, and then there's Ruby and Sapphire.
The Ruby and Sapphire Pokemon Pinball is one of the best pinball games I've ever played. It's frustrating at times, but it is a really awesome game, especially if you love Pokemon. So I think those two would be my favorites, but I'll put Portal at the top. And if you feel like I'm cheating because that game has violence in it, feel free to tell me in the comments down below the episode. I'm willing to discuss that. What about you, Geoff?
Well, and I guess the easy answer would be Katamari Damacy.
Right, of course. Everyone knew that already.
Right. No, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't bring it up super immediately in the episode. It's like, if you're a longtime listener, you already know that. But if this is your first time listening, it's one of my favorite games. And for a lot of reasons, it is a game with time limits and challenge and, little bits of stress. But there's also great joy in starting as a little ball, picking up slowly bigger and bigger things and becoming a bigger and bigger ball, bigger Katamari yourself. The sense of scale that shifts, it's a lot of fun, and it makes me very happy. And the aesthetic and music and characterizations are very fitting, wonderfully absurd, and they just make me happy. And even if for some reason I'm not doing well on a level or I'm not quite getting the goal fast enough, it's fine. It's one that I will endlessly play, even if I've beaten the game countless number of times now. It's great to go back to and try new routes or try new things. And it's one where it's an experience that has simple satisfaction in interacting with the world. And it's another one where if you really want to argue about, well, you're rolling up people, that's violent, I can do nothing for you there. I guess the secondary on that one would be like Intelligent Cube for the PS1, which is another puzzle. It's a puzzle game where, the most violent thing that happens is you get crushed by the cubes that you're interacting with.
Yeah.
But is a different kind of stressful but fun experience, and you gain satisfaction in like, I've taken care of all of the cubes. And when you've completed that wave and everything's fine and you just are waiting for the cubes that you can't do, the Doom cubes, the Forbidden cubes, the Black cubes, you either can just listen to the music and let them slowly rotate their way off, which is nice, or you can hold down the speed up button and just watch them go, and it's still very gratifying to watch that happen. So I guess those would be my two favorites. Katamari Damacy is definitely the top one, though. For sure.
Yeah. It's surprising no one who actually listens to this show.
Yeah, but it's nice to be consistent and nice to have we got a brand.
That's true, yeah. So, of course, we want to know what your favorite nonviolent games are, or if you don't like nonviolent games, let us know why. Maybe there's a reason you find them boring, too slow, whatever. At the end of the day, this is a conversation, and we want to keep it going as we always do. I also want to take a moment to officially state on the podcast, because we hadn't yet, that we will not be at Dark Side of the Con. It was postponed to September due to everything going on with the virus that shall not be named. But because of that, the rescheduled date in September is a conflict for me and Geoff, so we won't be attending. We hope to possibly do it in the future. With everything going on with quarantine, it's hard to know what our conference appearances will be. We do intend to try it and at least go to a video game con again. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have a panel again as well. More on that as we have more information, but we definitely
hopefully there'll be a con.
Right. At this point, we'd like to go to a video game con again like we did last year and do a panel there. But the summer is kind of nebulous at this point. So we kind of got to take it one step at a time. If you want to interact with us, though, there are plenty of places to do that, both on Discord or on the internet. We are both on Twitter. We are both on the Certain POV Discord, which is a permanent link to that on the Certain POV website. And we'll keep you posted as more personal appearances become a thing that we can do. But for now, that's kind of on the back burner until all of this blows over.
Yeah, well, and while we're all socially distancing and inside, it's a great time to go on certainpov.com and check out some of the other excellent shows that are part of the network. This is a great time for us to, as people are playing a lot more video games while they're staying indoors these days, it's a great time to think about the way you interact with those games, and we want to hear about it because, this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.